$750,000 in your 401k and 4 years until retirement? Can you make it work? Hey, I'm Casey Weade, CEO and founder here at Howard Bailey Financial. I'm also a certified financial planner practitioner, and we're here to answer one of your questions. We had one of our recent podcast listeners send us over a question, and we're going to be addressing this very question today. Can he retire? And this question came to us from Sean, and Sean said that he's about in his early 50s. We're going to assume he's 54. So he's in his early 50s, says he's 3 to 4 years out from retirement, and he has about $750,000 in his 401k. He said he has a little Roth, but we're just going to assume it's all in a 401k for simplicity's sake. And he thinks he needs to have $1.5 million in order to retire comfortably. So he currently has $750,000. Thinks he needs to have $1.5 million in order to retire comfortably, and then he's going on to ask, I feel like I need to take some of the risk off the table to fill in a gap. That is, before his wife steps into retirement, they're going to need a little additional income, and so he wants to know if he should be pulling $150,000, $200,000 out of equities or into a more conservative environment. And so this is the case that we're going to be looking at today. We're going to do a little bit more case setup. We're going to take a look at some different scenarios so that we can see what the odds are that he's not going to run out of money in retirement. And then we're going to start making some tweaks. Specifically, we're going to be focused on making 4 different tweaks in order to greatly increase his odds of success, his odds of not running out of money in retirement. So to revisit the case, we're assuming that he is 54. I'd love to have Sean here. I could ask him some great questions and we could really develop a more robust plan. We're going to have to make some assumptions today. So we're assuming that he is 54. He says 3 to 4 years. We're going to say 4 years. So he wants to retire in 4 years. He's 54. He's going to retire in 4 years. That puts him at 58. He has $750,000. He says it's 95% stocks. We're just going to assume it's 95% stocks. And then we're also going to assume an inflation rate of 3% per year on his expenses. And what are those expenses? Well, we're also going to have to assume that Sean's using the 4% withdrawal rule. So on $1.5 million, that would mean that he could withdraw 4% of that a year, adjust it for inflation. That's $60,000 a year. $5,000 a month. That doesn't mean that $5,000 a month is all of Sean's income. You know, he may have Social Security. We don't know how much Social Security. He may have pensions, might have rental income. You know, we just need to make an assumption here. And we're going to say $5,000 a month in expenses. And so now we're going to stress test that. And this is what we do first with families that come in and visit with us. We're going to leverage our tools and figure out, is this even viable on a base case scenario? So we're taking this portfolio and we're assuming 95% stocks, 5% fixed income, and then we're going to stress test the plan, meaning we're going to run Monte Carlo simulations. We're going to run thousands of different simulations based on the returns of those holdings that he has, and that's going to stress test it for sequence of returns ultimately. If we have bad returns on the front or bad returns on the back end, good returns on the front, good returns on the back end, and really anywhere in between. And what we find as we run this scenario is that if Sean doesn't make any changes, he currently has an 80% chance of success. There's a good reason for that 80% chance of success, and that is if we just look over the next 4 years and the kind of rate of return that Sean would need to get to where he thinks he needs to get. If he needs to turn $750,000 into $1.5 million, he's going to need to earn about 20% per year in returns. If he rips $200,000 out of that portfolio and doesn't invest in anything but, say, cash, then he's still going to need close to 30% per year in order to hit that goal. Now, it may seem right now, because we have a little recency bias, we're looking at the most recent period of time, and Sean's probably going, well, I've been making 20, 30% a year. I don't know why I couldn't do that over the next 3 or 4 years. Well, just because that's happened recently doesn't mean it's going to happen over the next couple of years. This is what we're stress testing against. You know, what if we don't get another 2-3 year period that's really good like we've seen over the last couple of years? And what we find is he has an 80% chance that he runs out of money in retirement. And when I was in school, 80% wasn't that bad. You were above average. You got a B minus, right? You know, but when it comes to retirement, Sean may be comfortable with that. He says, 80%, I'm willing to take on that level of risk. And now for me personally, I want that number to be higher. The standard in the financial advisory world is usually 90%, if not 95% or more. So how do we get that number to 95%? Now, Sean has said he wants to pull some money off the table. So now let's say that Sean pulls some of those dollars off the table. And we're going to assume that we take that $200,000 and set it aside in fixed income. We're going to use an aggregate bond fund. If we do that, now we're 75% equities or stocks, 25% fixed income, bonds, and we're going to run the same scenario. We're going to spend $5,000 a month, deferring out here for 4 years before we start taking that income. What are the odds that Sean is okay in retirement? Now that number goes from 80% chance of success down to a 65% chance of success. What's that tell us? That tells us that Sean needs to take a pretty significant level of risk in order to hit his retirement goals. Not just over the next few years, but all the way throughout retirement, Sean's going to have to be very heavily weighted to the equity side unless he makes some adjustments. Now, I recently had a great discussion with someone on the podcast, Larry Swedroe, who we talked about how we make this determination, and we focus on this three-legged stool. So when we look at this three-legged stool, it's made up of what is our capacity to take risk, what is our attitude to take risk, and what is our need to take risk. Our capacity, our attitude, our need, these are the three elements that we're looking at right now when it comes to Sean. Does Sean have the capacity to take risk? Well, the reality is Sean can't really afford to take risks because he hasn't actually saved enough for retirement in order to do so confidently. He doesn't have the capacity. He can't afford that $750,000 to take a significant loss. If we stress test that portfolio right now as he's currently invested, the odds are his extremes are $250,000 to the upside in a 12-month basis, $250,000 to the downside in a 12-month basis. That kind of fluctuation means he really couldn't afford the downside, right? He didn't have the capacity to take that risk. But it does seem like Sean has the attitude. If he's maintaining that high of an equity allocation, he probably has the attitude to go through market fluctuations and endure those and not panic when the market's down. But we don't know Sean. Maybe this is a relatively new thing for Sean, and he's only gotten this aggressive because the market's been that good. We don't know Sean well enough, but let's assume that he has the attitude. And then we get to the need. Does Sean have the need to take a significant amount of risk? Absolutely. We found that out in our stress test. He needs to take risk in order to hit his retirement goals. So if we set up that stool, we see the attitude and the need legs are all the way down to the ground. They're full, but we're lopsided because he doesn't have the capacity. And what Larry Swedroe said is what we need to do in that circumstance is we need to overweight that short leg. We need to overweight that short leg, and there's 4 ways that we can build that leg up. Either we can push out retirement, so we could add additional years to his working life, so continue to work a longer period of time. He could work a longer period of time, he could spend less in retirement, he could take on more risk in retirement, or he could increase his savings in retirement. We have to do one of those 4 things. Now, do we just attack one of those individual things? Maybe that's the best thing for Sean. More often than not, it's better that we just make some tweaks to each one of these. Maybe it makes sense that we add some savings. So we're going to start saving $18,000 a year. This is a stress test that we're going to run. We're going to increase savings to $18,000 a year over the next 4 years. Then we're going to push out retirement from what was 2029 to 2032. So we're pushing back retirement by 3 years. 3 more years of saving, 3 more years of accumulating. And then we're going to reduce expenses from $5,000 a month. We're going to reduce our distributions to $4,500 a month. And then we're going to increase our risk a little bit more than what Sean originally laid out. We're going to increase it by about 10%, kind of across the board here. We're going to land somewhere in the middle between 95% equities and 75% equities. So we're going to shore that up at about 85%. So we've changed each one of these things by about 10%, you could argue. In each one of those little tweaks, we now stress test. And what we find when we run the numbers in this new stress test is now we've got Sean in a position where he is over 95%. So he's now over a 95% probability that he's not going to run out of money in retirement. Now, is that the right plan for Sean? I don't know. Is it the right plan for you? I don't know. But if you want to find out for yourself, and get a consultation with one of our financial advisors where we can run these stress tests and scenarios, all you have to do is call the number on your screen to schedule a no obligation financial review no matter where you find yourself in the country.